The USS Lantry is a Class 6 Federation supply ship assigned to the Gamma 7 sector. Counselor Troy calls Dr. Pulaski Kate, and getting into the biofilter bus and patching in a molecular matrix reader is no problem for Chief Miles Edward O'Brien. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk. Today we have our review of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 2, Episode 7, Unnatural Selection, written by John Mason and Mike Gray, directed by Paul Lynch. This was January 28th, 1989. Where were you? Cirroc and I were going to get really deep into, biochemistry and genetic evolution and all that. Sadly, we have Dr. Mohamed Noor to steal our thunder here. He's a biogeneticist or a genetic evolutionary biologist or a big combination of those words from Duke University. So we'll let you talk about it instead, Mohamed. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be on The Seventh Rule. Yay. Thanks for having me.
Yes, Cirroc. We were so excited to just really show off our genetic, evolutionary biology chops. But
yeah,
maybe not.
Well, I mean, it's funny because after we just went through this, pandemic, I understand a little bit more than I would have had we not. So that was one benefit of kind of experiencing that together. We've had so many kind of public debates about, viruses, antibodies, quarantines, outbreaks. So I definitely have more knowledge about the subject than I did, going into this, let's say, when this episode would have come out.
Yeah.
But definitely want to hear a lot about what Mohamed has to say, about how this thing works and really if it's a realistic interpretation of the facts, because that's what we really try to break down the science and say, are they just telling me a bunch of mumbo jumbo, or are they actually telling me something that's truthful? So Mohamed, you'd be the best to kind of decipher that for us.
100%.
I can do my best. I totally agree with your point too about the pandemic too. That I used to always have to define RNA, but now everybody knows what RNA is now,
or thinks they do.
Right?
Yeah, or thinks they do. That's true.
Right. Yeah, Mohamed. First and foremost, did you see this episode in 1989 or thereabouts when it came out? And how do you feel that the science compared in 1989 to what we know now and what we've learned since then?
Sure. So yes, I'm sure I saw it. Maybe not right when it aired, but I'm sure very, very shortly after it aired. I was definitely watching Star Trek Next Generation in the late 80s. In January 1989, I was in my first year of college, so probably sometime in there I would have seen it. Maybe, again, probably sometime within a month or two when it aired, I saw that. Besides, there's a lot of aspects to it which are not very specific, right? So in that sense, you could say it holds up pretty well because they're not super specific about that. Like I would have, let's say I was writing this episode today and I was trying to write some script for it. I would have had a lot more specificity around some things in there. So actually what I did is I wrote out 3 possible scenarios to try to explain what's happening there. And then I sort of critiqued myself on each one. And what I like, and I tell my students all the time, it's easy to throw stones and do actually, that doesn't work. But like, that's not fun, right? It's much more fun to say like, how could it work? Like, how might it work? Even if it's a small tweak on some of the words they say in there. And there's not a lot of words. So just pulling up the script there, it has things like the antibody created an unexpected side effect that alters the genetic makeup of normal humans. Okay, that's not very specific. An antibody's doing something genetically. Their advanced immune system has created an antibody that changes normal DNA. The altered genes are the ones that control aging. Yeah, it's not super specific, but I've like I said, I worked out 3 scenarios, and I can go through each one in turn if you want.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
And also, since I was so busy making a dumb joke at the beginning, saying how Cirroc and I want to explain biology, I should have also mentioned, Dr. Noor, 2 more qualifications, 2 more qualifiers. You are an occasional Star Trek science advisor, as well as being a very good friend of ours and a great guy. So please continue.
I'm even more honored by the second one than the first one, but I'm honored by both. Thank you. So I tried to come up with 3 different ways that this could happen, where something is being emitted by the kid that's making people age very quickly. And it obviously has to do something with genetics. So the simplest explanation, I thought, is that something that he's emitting, these antibodies that he's emitting, change not the DNA letters, but change which genes are turned on or off, right?
Okay.
So we have like, 20-some thousand genes in our bodies, and we have the same genes in every cell in our bodies, but the same genes aren't turned on or turned off. So, like, for example, our skin cells will make more skin cells. They don't make, heart cells on our hand. And that's based on which genes are turned on or off. So if you think of like the DNA, like the letters, the words in a book, right? What you might think is there's some alterations that happen on top of them that might be like striking out some words or highlighting some words so that, basically you're reading them louder or different, but the same letters are in every cell. Right. So that's kind of what this sort of epigenetic or something that's affecting which genes are turned on or off. So that could be one possible explanation. What doesn't work for that was the solution, right? That they just got this bit of DNA from hair follicles on her brush, and that was able to solve everything. Because, like, okay, unless they turn her into a giant follicle.
Right. Okay. So what you're saying is the hair follicle, the DNA inside the hair follicle, or the genes that are in each cell of the hair follicle, can only self-replicate. They cannot derive an entire human from that
you'd have
information.
To basically change them back to stem cells to do that, which they wouldn't do that, right? So that was one possible explanation of what's going on. There was something about genes turned on or off. And again, I should mention all 3 of these explanations are not mutually exclusive. It could be some mixture thereof. But I figure like that first one by itself doesn't work. The second one is probably the simplest one, which is it's literally just mutations. Like there's change in these DNA layers, and that's what people always tend to fall back on. All sci-fi loves mutations. The problem with mutations are random. Like if this antibody is coming out there, it's not going to make the same letter changes in every individual it hits and in every cell it affects and things like that. So it's kind of like, would that result in this consistent sort of aging thing, or would it just be like, just getting bizarre cancerous growth sometimes and moles and weird other sorts of things all the time? So that, again, I didn't feel like that worked great, but there's some basis to it, because to some extent, if you screw things up, then you might have some manifestation which vaguely looks like aging. The third one was actually my favorite. The end of every chromosome has this sort of cap that's called a telomere, right? And it's basically just it's like a cap. There's a bunch of repetitive DNA there. As you get older, your telomeres shrink. Right? Essentially, as you're making more and more copies of every cell in your body, the telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter, and eventually, like, they get so short that they start causing problems. And it's thought that all 3 of these things could contribute to aging, and this is one of the things that people think potentially does contribute to aging, because as it gets too far in, you start losing some actual genes that have functions and stuff like that. So if you imagine this antibody might be affecting, rather than the DNA itself, it's affecting the enzymes that keep the telomeres long. Maybe then it's actually essentially having a secondary effect on your genes. That to me was probably like the best explanation. Like, okay, you could make any of the 3 explanations I said work, but to me that just seemed like, okay, I can see this. I can see that this antibody is affecting one specific enzyme that then has this effect, which is pretty consistent across a whole bunch of people. I was like, okay, that works well. It still comes back to, everything always comes back to this brush thing though, right? Because the weird thing to me is, what are they getting from the brush? I mean, the implication was they're just getting her DNA sequence. It's weird that like hundreds of years from now, they don't just have that on file for like everybody. I mean, I have my DNA sequence here on my computer. It's weird to me, like, why isn't that just on file? Like, why do they have to get that? Like, and with the extra bits of repetitive stuff, it seemed like they would just have that.
I just to jump in on that, when they said that they erased her DNA file after she left the previous ship, I was like, why? How much space does that really take? Like, it's just code. It's like information that you could fit it all in a file. It's a folder on your computer. So that was my one nitpick there. Yeah.
We could argue it's a privacy thing too, because there are a lot of privacy reasons why you might not want that sort of share. However, most of those privacy concerns are very specific to a very capitalist society, right? Oh, this is going to affect your possibility of employment. Oh, this is going to affect like your long-term care insurance. Oh, this is going to affect, like, it tends to be more in there as opposed to just true privacy. It tends to be more in that. But maybe there's still some other privacy things that don't fall in that, so maybe it still will work. The one piece which I can't actually fix in my head is the speed of transformation. So they beam her back, they fix whatever about her DNA, and she's just like back to the way she was before. Like, so the only thing I could come up with is maybe somehow the transporter was like using the DNA letters to make what should have been there already, right? Back to that form. The problem is if that were true, I don't understand why they wouldn't do that anytime anybody has any sort of injury. Like that would be like transporter is just a magic fix for anything then, right?
Right.
So
as long as we have your DNA before the thing happened, whatever happens to you, we can just magically fix it in this kind of medical way.
Exactly. And there's also all the other stuff too about like how does it keep her memories from while she was gone, like that's all that stuff. I mean, the transporters are always like, I still actually think transporters are death devices because I mean you're basically taking somebody completely apart and you're putting them together somewhere else with different matter. To me, that means that's not the same person. That's a duplicate of that person, but that first person is dead.
Okay. So here was some of the questions that I had when you were talking about the science of it.
Please.
I wanted to ask you. So, given the what you said as possibilities of the changes that could occur, my question is could that happen in an airborne situation with this other entity? This genetically modified 12-year-old that they had.
That's a great question.
Would that be able to transfer through airborne?
It's possible. So, it is true that the antibodies can be inhaled and things like that from other things. They can be in spit and stuff like that. So, to some extent, yes. The tricky part, I'm glad you asked that question. The tricky part there, and this is something I was struggling with too, is how does it affect that much of her body that fast? So let's say you inhale it, then okay, maybe your lungs are going to start like aging faster or whatever is happening. Right. But like your whole body's doing that. I'm guessing somehow there's enough of it that it gets into your circulatory system and it's just spread everywhere. But it's you're right that it is at least problematic. It's not impossible, but it is at least problematic there. So that's a very good call. But that was what I was struggling with as well.
But that's
because I was thinking. No, sorry. Go ahead, Ryan.
That's a trope that we've seen all too often in Star Trek and sci-fi. Is they catch a disease or they get a laser shot at them. And then they turn into a Klingon, or they turn into they triple in size and become a monster. And I'm like, I don't even understand how that's physically. They should, at the very least, eat a lot of food before they do.
The conservation of mass thing is definitely a tough thing.
Their body can't change that quickly. I mean, I can suspend my disbelief that some virus made them turn into a werewolf, for example. But I can't suspend my disbelief that suddenly their hair just went from, a centimeter to 3 inches in 20 seconds. Like that's where my brain doesn't work. Is there, I don't know, is there any kind of explanation for that kind of stuff, which is kind of similar to what we're talking about here? Or is that's just no way, Jose?
Again, I never say never, but it is definitely a significant challenge. I mean, you'd have to say like, cell division is increased dramatically in this set of stuff. But you're right, like the mass has to come from somewhere. That's always the bottom line thing. The mass has to be there. The raw materials for doing it have to be present there. So yeah. And so when you see somebody like just suddenly growing, like, okay, like are they converting air into that? I mean, where is this mass coming from?
They better eat a lot of food or something.
They're eating a ton real fast.
The other question I had was working in they called it the Darwin Genetic Research Station. And my understanding is that if you're working with infectious disease at a research laboratory, that you wear you wear some kind of protective gear. And it felt a little bit unnatural for me to just see everybody walking around in the lab coats. And I'm like, this is with an outbreak in it, and it felt like there would be more precaution taken when you're dealing with these kinds of things.
Yeah. No, well said. No, it's true. Anything working with anything infectious, there's all sorts of precautions. Like, people say OSHA, the Office of Safety and Health and stuff like that, like they would never approve most of what we see in Star Trek. They'd be like, what? No.
Yeah.
But the one thing for this particular place, I mean, they weren't although there was an outbreak, so they should have done exactly what you said. It is formally a genetics lab, so I guess more of the protection would less be about like germs. So there would be some for the germ things too, but some of it would be the danger of you're accidentally introducing, like as you're breathing on samples, you're introducing some of your DNA onto it, or bacteria in your lungs into it. That would be there'd be a heavy concern about contamination, even more so than health risks, unless of course, there is actually an outbreak. In that case, then it becomes a health risk too. So like in our genetics lab, we always wear like gloves and stuff like that, because if we're doing these reactions, we don't amplify our cells. We want to work on the cells we're working on. So keep your stuff away from it. It was interesting. There was a comment made too, where they said something like, "Are they genetically engineered?" And they said, "No, they're created," or something. I'm like, are you just talking figuratively? What does that mean in this sense? Like, I didn't quite understand. There was a passing sentence there which I didn't quite get. And they just
Isn't that the same thing? We engineered it. We created it. That's
but there was the person specifically said, "No, we created." Like, my take was the same thing. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that argument comes from like where the actual babies originated from when they were children. If they were like done through some kind of in vitro process, if they were created in laboratories, or if they were
the kids or the people
natural birth. If they were done through natural birth and then augmented after natural birth. So I guess
that's a good call.
It would probably identify that.
That's a good call. Origin. I can see that.
Yeah. But there were a lot of questions that I had watching this. The telepathy also was something that I was wondering how and why it was a factor in the equation. Like, did the telepathy enhance the the ability for this thing to spread? Did the telepathy, what was the factor? Why did telepathy need to be introduced as the subject matter, and how did it enhance the story? I couldn't really make that correlation as well.
That's a brilliant question. I mean, I'm sure it was more storytelling just to show how advanced they are. So that's probably, from a storytelling reason, that's probably why they did it. Genetically, you try to think like, what's the material basis for telepathy? Like, something has to be emitted and something has to be received. Like, is it radio waves? Is it like chemicals? Maybe they're breathing words. Now you're like, oh, I love you. It's like pheromones or something. Maybe, I don't know, but
right. And then it would have been nice to see the correlation between that and how contagious this particular thing was. That would have been a great correlation there too.
Oh, I love that. But they took it even further. They even had telekinesis, where they were like moving things with their mind. Like,
right.
Now we've jumped the shark here.
Yeah. No, I'm like, well, this is really necessary. This is just extras there.
We could have an entire video just on the biology of telepathy, Mohamed, and that's something for your YouTube channel, Bio Trekkie Explains. Everybody go check that out. But that would be a really good one, because we have things like on Earth, like ants, they communicate through what is it, like pheromones or something crazy like that, we have radio waves, or not radio waves, audio waves from like dolphins in the ocean, or things like
there's like electric signals and stuff too. Some animals have electroreceptors too. So
exactly,
there's
things like
all
that.
Sorts of cool communication.
We would initially think cavemen would be like, whoa, telepathy, but we know that there's something going on there. So what's the science behind telepathy? How can that be explained? But there was one, I thought the best line. It was kind of philosophical, but also based in science to my limited mind. I think it was, at least. The line was, an attempt to control evolution had resulted in a species that is lethal to its predecessors. And it feels like that is certainly the case on our planet, that when something new emerges through mutations or slowly through just evolution, they end up wiping out its predecessors. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes. And this was clearly an accelerated version of that. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we probably, I wouldn't be surprised if modern humans, killed all the remaining Homo erectus that was out there. Just as an example. No, I'm sure that happens quite often. Yeah. So I think it's less often that's a very intentional, actually going out to kill. I think it's often just they're so much better at, using up this resource or something like that that then is just completely replaced, where the other ones can't get any resource and they starve out or just don't reproduce nearly as much and eventually go away. I think that's much more common than actually like killing them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was also thinking how that could be applied in in the way of artificial intelligence. That same logic about in a quest to perfect the human experience, you actually create something that could wipe it out.
Yeah, no, it's a scary but brilliant question. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you also about because they drop these lines on us, and to the novice it sounds like, oh yeah, okay, this is legit. I need to be like, it's above my head, right? And so one of the lines was when Dr. Kingsley meets Dr. Pulaski, she says, "Did you write the book on linear models of viral propagation?" And I'm like, is that a thing? Or are they just throwing away? like, linear models of viral propagation. I mean, it sounds legit,
Yeah, I don't know what that means. I can imagine some scenarios like, when you say linear, does it talking about like the speed of growth, like where like it grows linearly, or is it actually talking about like the actual replication process happening? Yeah, I thought that was a funny line, but it's not crazy. But like, yeah, what it meant, I wasn't so clear on either.
Okay, okay, okay.
Those
so
are
like,
certainly all words
Those are
strung
words.
together, but
they could be applied to
mean?
viruses in some way.
Yeah, okay. So sometimes I have my little BS detector goes off, and I'm like, I don't know. But this is a question for somebody who has way more knowledge than me. But like I said, once again, because of the pandemic and because we went through these things, viral propagation. Okay, that kind of sounds, something familiar to what I've been hearing. And I thought actually this episode was kind of prescient in that way, in the way we have kind of dealt with the pandemic. When you talked about quarantines, that was something that was really, emphasized in this, so that they can limit the outbreak to just that area and that ship. So those kinds of concepts to me were very prescient. And I was like, oh, these are the things that we have actually dealt with. Um, and actually, to add to that, some of the concerns that I heard expressed when people had skepticism about taking the vaccine, some of those skeptics brought up points that were similar in nature to the ones that were brought up here, about their DNA being, manipulated, and what the side effects would be and how they wouldn't be able to determine those things. So the level of uncertainty and the questions that were brought up in this episode, I thought were something that were really reflective of society when the moment came, and we were all kind of facing this panic of, what's the right thing to do? Do you wear masks? Do you do this? Do you social distance? We got to do this. We got to isolate. We got to quarantine. And so I thought that was accurate. Some of the general concepts were accurate based on what we've really experienced.
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree. Completely.
And
agree.
just to add to that, also similar was we found out, with COVID and all that, that just like in this episode, it was the children to blame. We knew it. We knew it all along.
One thing is interesting in so much of Star Trek, they very, very rarely have geneticists play the good guys. Like, it's extraordinary, and they're almost always like they're the cause of a big problem, or they're just outright evil, or something like that. The only exception I could think of is Carol Marcus in the Wrath of Khan. She was the only case where it was a good guy, and even then, her stuff got misused and blah blah blah. But pretty much anytime you see geneticists, they're always evil, and then the engineers, they're the ones who save everything. Like, okay.
Speaking of which, this was, I would say, the debut of Chief O'Brien and his big role as the engineer.
This was his big coming out party, like out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. He had all the techno babble one man can handle in an episode.
And he was even at the point where the tension was the highest. Like, oh, it's not working. He's like, wait, I got this. He's just like typing away on his thing and like, got it. I'm like, okay.
definitely want to talk more about O'Brien in our second segment, because it was almost like he was the second star of this episode out of nowhere. Didn't even expect
out of nowhere.
Yes. But we're just about out of time with you, Dr.
Oh, I have
Noor.
another question for you,
Yes.
Dr. Noor, because maybe our audience wants to know these answers. Sterilite. Did that seem something that was believable to you? The sterilite substance, and were you sold on it?
I haven't heard of that. I wouldn't swear that doesn't exist. I haven't heard of a sterilite, but I mean, I guess essentially having some sort of encasement. I mean, yeah, it's okay.
Okay, so you suspended a little bit.
That didn't strike me as one of the more problematic aspects. I imagine if there's something there that could completely encase it, like, yeah, probably if there was some sort of antibodies or whatever in there, probably hold it all in. What I didn't understand is how the people were living in that. They didn't quite, like, are they in some weird stasis inside the sterilite? I was a little confused about that, but in terms of the infection part, like, yeah.
like you mean like in a cryogenic type state where their life signs are being supplemented or something to that effect?
Yeah, basically, it seemed like there was no. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, he's choking because there's no air in there. Like, it just seemed like he was fine. It's like sitting in that thing.
I was watching for it too. I was like, they didn't even poke holes for the nostrils. What's going on here? I paused it. I was zooming in.
Definitely getting out.
I'm like, and when he breathes out, shouldn't it fog up? Like, they did a good job with that. Whatever it was. Anyway, Dr. Mohamed Noor, thank you so much for calling in all the way from Duke University and teaching us some things as you always do. We really appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure. I love seeing you guys.
Oh, and everybody, check this out. I'm wearing my Be Kind shirt. You can get yours at bekindmerch.org. It's Chase Masterson's group and team. And this is the Kenneth Mitchell variety. So you can go to bekindmerch.org/Kenneth Mitchell and get your very own Be Kind merchandise, which is a charity that goes to great causes. So please check that out. Anyway, Dr. Mohamed Noor, thanks so much for hanging out with us. We will see you soon, I'm sure. Everybody else, stick around. We'll be right back.
Always remember the seventh rule.
Yeah.
Damn, better than I've ever done it too.
Yeah, tell me about it.